Hey, everybody. Welcome once again to our bi-weekly bird ID discussion show here in the ABA's What's This Bird group and on all across the ABA's various social media whatnots. I am Nate Swick. I host the American Birding Podcast and do a lot of the digital communications here at the ABA.
Hey everybody,
and I'm joined.
Welcome once again to our bi-weekly bird ID discussion piece.
Hold on just a second. I'm going to turn this down. There it is. And I'm joined as we have a special treat. I am joined not by Greg Neese, my usual partner here, but by Ted Floyd, who is the editor of the ABA's Birding magazine. How are you, Ted?
I'm doing fine. Thanks for having me, Nate.
Yeah, so as people start to come in a little bit, we'll do a little vamping here while we're waiting for us to
vamp away. All right.
How's spring going with you? It's still kind of chugging along here in the eastern part in the southeast. I saw my first blackpoll warbler 2 days ago, so it's all coming to a close sooner rather than later, I suppose. But how are things in Colorado?
I'd say things are sort of just getting started out here in Colorado. The mountains and foothills are still very snow covered, but things have melted down in the lowlands here, although we may be getting more snow early next week, actually.
Wow.
It's a beautiful sunny day. Today I was actually running errands this morning and right in downtown Boulder saw a broad-winged hawk migrating over. Wow. So that's a bird that sort of migrates in small but steady numbers right along the base of the foothills at sort of late April into early May. And I was actually at one of those indoor-outdoor malls at a computer repair shop of all places, and lots of violet-green swallows were about. And as I said, the broad-winged hawk got to see a Swainson's hawk up on a pole eating a snake too. So that's another one of our recently returned migrants. So we've still got a solid month of migration ahead of us out here.
It's interesting you note broad-winged hawk. I was at one of the kind of the local migration hotspots here in my county, a little park called Hamilton Lakes, and there's a pair of nesting broad-winged hawks there. So they're already on eggs. Actually, I think they actually have chicks now. They were actively bringing food back when I was there the other day.
Broadwings have just started nesting in Colorado. As far as you know, the first time ever. I mean, I'm talking about one or two instances thereof, but we used to think of them as sort of the rarities of the rare, and they're more common than we imagined, and they may be increasing as well.
Huh, that's interesting. It's fun to see them. It's a hawk I don't usually see all that often, actually. Most of the migration of the broadwings in the Carolinas, at least, tends to stay towards the western part of the state. Right. They kind of follow the mountains up a little bit, but they do nest at this park and have for the last several years. So there are 2 red-shouldered hawk nests and 2 broad-winged hawk nests and 1 Cooper's hawk nest, all kind of in the same relatively small area. It's kind of funny how the raptors seem to tolerate each other. They must pick slightly different niches, though I do think that broad-wing overlaps with both of those birds in some sense, but they manage just fine. They're both kind of flying around, and there's still tons of warblers hanging out too, so they must not be too much of a threat.
Cool.
So I'll explain a little bit what we do. Hello to all the people commenting on Facebook in the What's This Bird Facebook group. Chris, Mia, Len, Jared, our friend from St. John's, Newfoundland. Hello. Newfoundland.
Oh, good. Hey, Jared.
No, Newfoundland, like understand.
I know what you mean. St. John's.
That's right.
With or without an apostrophe, that's the question. But yeah, sorry.
Right. So what we typically do here is we will pull some photos that have been posted to the ABA's What's This Bird Facebook group. If you're not familiar with that group, it is a kind of a crowdsourced bird photography identification group. People can take a photo when everyone has cameras in their pockets these days, so we get a lot of photos of birds at feeders and whatnot, but you can post them in the group and we will crowdsource the identification. We have a lot of regular birders there, a lot of skilled birders there who regularly like to share how they came up with that identification and all the ins and outs of bird ID. And but we're going to take that a little bit further here. Every 2 weeks, Ted, Greg, or I, or any combination of those 3 people will typically pull some of the more interesting photos that we have seen from that group in the last few days, and we get kind of a good sense of what the ID questions that people have all across the continent is kind of an interesting thing. Right now, a lot of people asking about warblers. particularly female warblers and some ratty-looking sparrows. So not necessarily ratty. I do have some sparrows to share. So we have kind of a who's grab bag of birds from across the continent today. And Ted, if you got nothing else, we can just jump right into it. We will
let's jump right into it.
Let's do it. Here we go. Okay. So I have this photo here of a bird that was taken just a couple days ago in New Jersey. So a lot of new birds showing up in New Jersey. So there's a lot of opportunities for people to enjoy new arrivals, and I think this is definitely one of them. What are some things that stand out to you on this bird, Ted?
Right. Well, an image like this, which is, as you said, from New Jersey, is an opportunity for me to get up on my my soapbox here just a little bit here, and to remind folks of the most important field marks of all, which are not necessarily a color and pattern or size and shape or vocalizations, which we can't hear, but rather where you are and what day it is. So we're in New Jersey, and I assume this image is recent, right? It's in the past week or so.
In the last 2 days, yes.
Yeah, in the last 2 days.
The 5th, maybe. But, I usually just scroll down to the first few photos I see, which means that they are maybe even as recent as today. Right.
So anyhow, since we're in New Jersey in May, there are a whole bunch of birds this can't be. It can't be a roadrunner or a chachalaca or a wren tit. And that's actually really, really, really important for a bird like this, because with this bird's sort of upright posture and very big, broad-based bill, it's going to be one of the flycatchers. And in particular, with the yellow belly and the red in the wings, it's going to be one of the very, very, very difficult Myarchus flycatchers, of which we have a number of species in the ABA area. However, in New Jersey, you only have two choices, the ash-throated and the great crested. And in the spring, you only have one choice, the great crested. So without having said anything about why this is a great crested flycatcher, we know it's a great crested flycatcher because in New Jersey and in May, the only yellow-bellied, red-winged, big gray flycatcher is the great crested flycatcher. So folks, date and location, date and location, date and location. They are so important. Now, if this were Texas or New Mexico or San Diego, we'd have to be talking about other Myarchus flycatchers, but New Jersey in May, and this is a great crested, sort of end of discussion.
Yeah. But let's do that. Let's consider whether we were in Texas or Arizona or New Mexico. So let's say that you are in those places where the great crested actually would be somewhat unusual, but not unheard of. I think it is a somewhat regular vagrant in the western part of the
or so for example in South Texas now, where you could certainly have 3 species in this genus: this bird, the great crested flycatcher, the brown crested fly. Sorry, weeds. My mind was elsewhere. This bird ages ago was called weeds crested flycatcher, and then of course the ash-throated flycatcher. So it's not those, again, because we're in New Jersey, but an ash-throated flycatcher is a much, much paler bird overall. It's called ash-throated because it has that very pale, ashy throat. And then the brown-crested flycatcher is it's larger build overall. The other differences, which I can't really make out too well in this image, have to do with the tail. So what we call the retrices, the flight feathers of the tail. The exact pattern of dark and red are very important for distinguishing birds. Often birds in the hand are very well photographed birds. Vagrants out of range are often identified by the tail pattern. So anyhow, those are some ways you would tell them apart. But excuse me, this is a nice dark flycatcher.
And not just because the photo is a little underexposed.
Even so, it's just, it's a nice dark flycatcher with a lot of yellow underneath. Hey, one other thing I'll mention, I can't remember if I said it earlier or not, but all the birds in this genus have this really weird habit of like lurching forward. And especially I see that on a great crested. It's sort of like the way that like eared trogon does. And it's not a trogon, but you can almost picture this being sort of like a trogon.
I can see the shape, that kind of hunch, the big rump and the kind of big belly. Yeah, that's a very trogon-esque.
So I don't think anybody would ever confuse a great crested flycatcher with an eared trogon. But lurching forward in a tree. Those are sort of another funny trivia question there. But what do the eared trogon and the great crested flycatcher have in common? And there you have it. So,
And for most of us in the eastern part of the United States, great crested flycatchers have been moving in increasing numbers. They tend to arrive in the middle of April. and they're pretty common in a lot of any sort of deciduous habitat. They like to take to even well wooded neighborhoods with a lot of those old trees and no understory for the most part. I have them in my neighborhood actually across the street. I frequently hear great crested flycatchers calling with that really emphatic weep.
You mentioned. Hearing the birds. I didn't mention that at all, but that's another great way to tell them apart. If we were in Texas, that wheep and that sort of that 3-syllable note that the great cresteds give. So the ash-throated gives a completely different sort of kabrick, which actually can sound like Cassin's kingbird, but which I never would confuse with an ash-throated flycatcher. And then the brown crested has this very sort of musical rolling whip-will-do. And if you have a chance to hear them, that wheep, as you said, of the great crested is just such a distinctive call. And I've never heard anything remotely like it from another ABA area, Myarchus.
Chris Ortega in the Facebook comments notes that tough to see. It looks like this bird has a pale base of the bill, which is most common on great crested. Sure, that's not a field mark I typically look to first. But if you're going to check all your boxes, that's something that you might want to be aware of at very least, especially if you're talking about birding in the fall. You see a Myarchus, you're at that sort of weird time of year where great crested and maybe in the eastern U.S. ash-throated are about equally likely. Something that you want to sort of look for to make that identification.
Right. So if this had been like after, I'm not exactly sure when ash-throated start to show up in New Jersey, but there's some point actually at which ash-throated is more common than great crested. But there's got to be some sort of a transition point there where either one is a pretty good bird, and you absolutely want to separate between the two because again, ash-throated is a night.
The Myarchus inflection.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, whenever that's kind of a cool question. When is the Myarchus inflection in New Jersey? But
you could probably do that with eBird data.
Yeah, you probably could. Yeah, but for sure, this would be a less facile identification if we were doing this in the fall.
Before we move on to the next picture, I do have a question from Jean McKay. Mackie, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. Jean, on YouTube, she notes, is there such a thing as a field guide for young kids, 6 to 8 years old? Do you have any recommendations for the New England area? I know we both have kids. We've always looked for bird books, age appropriate bird books. The first one that comes to mind for me was the late Bill Thompson III's field guide to I forget exactly the title.
That's precisely what I was going to say as well. That book is maybe for kids a little older than 6 to 8, maybe sort of more like the 8 to 8 to 12 age range. But that's also my recommendation as well.
It's the Young Birder's Guide.
There you go. Yep, that sounds right. Yep, that's a neat book. It clearly was conceived with a sort of a young reader audience. There's sort of these pop outs and did you know and wow comments in there. It's a really nice book, and I'll be honest with you, it's not a bad book for grown-ups either. But that would be my top recommendation.
Yeah, I know that when I was young and I was learning to be a birder or just a naturalist at that age, I was much more kind of a general naturalist. My family had field guides just kind of hanging out. My dad was a science teacher, and so he would have the guides available, and they were just kind of in bookshelves and on coffee tables and whatnot throughout our house. And so I just kind of picked them up as we went. That was sort of, I'm sure your experience may be very similar, Ted.
Yeah, and I may get in trouble for saying what I'm about to say, but I guess I'll say it anyhow. I'm thinking, you said 6 to 8 years old. I can think of a really superb 9-year-old naturalist who is learning a tremendous amount from iNaturalist. So I know that's a screen and not a book, but boy, it's a wonderful way to quickly learn not only the birds, but all of the plants and animals and other organisms around your house. So the mileage may vary.
Jared Clark notes that there was a great Stokes book too, organized by color with common backyard birds. I'm not aware of that, but definitely need to look for. The Stokes have a lot of great books.
Cool.
All right, shall we move on to the next? We'll go back to our images. This is another photo of a bird that was taken. The photograph was taken in Arizona, and I like this one. It's not an uncommon bird, but it's missing a few of the field marks that we like to see on this bird, which is causing it some problems with the identification. I can see why the person posted it.
Yeah, so this is sort of the opposite, if you will, the converse of our New Jersey scenario. So if this bird were in New Jersey, there's only one thing it could be, which is a mockingbird. There's just, I can't think of anything else in New Jersey that would look like this. In Arizona, though, you have to deal with other birds in the mockingbird family, which are called thrashers, also the catbird, although this isn't a catbird for a whole bunch of reasons. And, there are some of the smaller, drabber thrashers, like the Ben Dyer's thrasher and the sage thrasher, that can look a lot like mockingbirds. The old name for the sage thrasher actually was the mountain mockingbird, because
it's probably a more accurate name. I think.
I mean,
they've done the work, and it's probably, I think it's more closely related to the mockingbirds than it is to the other thrashers. It's in its own genus.
And the Oreoscopus. But the sage thrashers that I most commonly see in Colorado are in rabbitbrush and greasewood. They're not even in sagebrush, so it's a funny name in that regard too. But having said that, I don't think that this is one of the birds called thrasher. The two options there in Arizona would be again Ben Dyer's and sage thrasher. They're much browner, warmer overall. They're a somewhat more curved build, although not by much. They have more going on their breasts than a mockingbird would. So I think that this is a mockingbird, as you said, missing some field marks. The wing bars just aren't there, and the tail is ratty. And I think the eye is yellowish. I can't quite make that out, but that's good. But it doesn't look completely black. So this is a quite bland-looking northern mockingbird.
Yeah, I agree. And it does look awfully dark, but I think that has more to do with the where the light is on this image. You can see it's kind of, I think the light is sort of coming in from the left, and so it's kind of at a harsher angle, maybe a bit behind the bird, so that when the person took this photo, it comes out darker than you would maybe see it in real life. And also, mockingbirds, when we see them flying around, we typically see those big white tail patches, big white wing patches, especially, and that's a slam dunk identification field mark for a mockingbird, and you just don't see that in this bird. And so imagine taking a photo of this bird, pulling out your photos again, and looking at them after the fact, and then suddenly you are caught caught off guard by what you thought you may have seen in the field. It goes to show, when you're identifying birds, sometimes you can't see, an absence of a field mark is not necessarily the same as presence of a field mark, right?
Sure.
So, if you don't see a thing, that doesn't necessarily mean it's not there. It just could mean that you don't see it. And so, it'd be the path you should go down is, I can't see it. That doesn't mean it's not there. I'm gonna identify this as a mockingbird perhaps instead of one of the thrashers, which would not have the white in the wings or tail.
Yep. Hey, something I didn't mention, or that I sort of blew right past, is why it's a mockingbird or a thrasher at all.
Oh yeah.
So they're in the family Mimidae or Mimidae, but there are a lot of birds that actually present this exact same plumage pattern. The juvenile cowbird looks a lot like this. A female house sparrow sort of looks like this. In fact, I know it's an odd thing to say, but a first cycle herring gull looks a lot like this bird actually. But there are some reasons that this is not a sparrow or a cowbird, or definitely a gull. It's a very sort of svelte, long, elegant, drawn out bird with a really long tail and, fairly long bill. A cowbird, a sparrow would not have a bill like that. So it is funny to think that if you just describe the plumage of this bird, just the colors of the feathers and where they are in the different parts of the bird, this is actually not a bad match to a first cycle herring gull, which is of course a ridiculous thing to say. I get that. But I always go back to that.
Webbed feet for starters, Ted.
Oh yes, look at that. But anyhow, Bill Oddie in Britain does this marvelous essay where he compares pectoral sandpiper and skylark, and their plumages are almost identical, but they're structurally and behaviorally completely different. But he goes to this exercise where he takes you down this road thinking that you're looking at a pectoral sandpiper, and all of a sudden it's a skylark. So, and to be clear,
I'm trying to think of other really odd pairings that would fit that.
Yeah. So here's one for you that we wrestle with in Colorado a lot. It's American pipit and sage thrasher. I know that's crazy sounding, but that's a real source of confusion. And in our in-state groups here, we don't call them "What's this bird?" but they're more or less the same thing. we'll get birds that are, they come down to, is this a sage thrasher or is it an American pipit? And they are not closely related at all. They're structurally, behaviorally quite different. But boy, you get one of those perched up on a barbed wire fence, and they can be remarkably similar.
I'm trying to think of some really off the wall ones, and I'm having trouble. I'll have to come back to it. This requires more thought than I can do, like sort of on the fly.
Fair enough,
so to speak. Mia McPherson notes that boat and great-tailed grackles could be confused for this bird.
Sure,
as well. It does look quite a bit like a female great-tailed grackle, like the sort of lanky. And as we said, this bird is probably not as brown as it looks in this image, but great-tailed grackle is very brown.
Yep, and some of the younger great-tailed grackles can be very gray like this bird as well. So yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. All right, so we move on to the next one.
Let's move on.
What we
to the
have
next
here is a bird from New Hampshire. It's looking a bit muddy, not super clean this time of year, and so this was clearly I think this was probably taken at a feeder. It looks like it was probably a bird underneath a feeder. It's very round. It's got that conical short bill, and streaks on the back, which leads me to sparrow as opposed to subadult laughing gull.
I think it even has some seed on the bill there. It looks like it's been feeding. So
talk about that.
Okay.
Bird,
but consistent with the sparrow hypothesis, right?
Yeah, it confirms. So where we go from there?
Yeah. Okay. So I agree that that's a sparrow for all the reasons you mentioned. Again, conical bill, little brown job, feeding on the ground, conical, and I think some food on the bill there. Yeah. So this is a very washed out, I think you used the word muddy looking bird. It's not a bad photograph. It's just a weird looking bird, but it's got all of the at least sort of hints or vestiges of what can be one of our most boldly marked sparrows. It's got a yellow above the eye there, sort of between the eye and the bill. We call that the super laurel. It's got a white crown. It's got black on either side of the white crown. And it's got something going on in the throat. I can't quite make that out. Oh, but it's got black stripes.
I don't know what's
black,
going on there.
Black base there. But all of those field marks add up to the white-throated sparrow. Yeah. This being just a particularly muddy version thereof. At this time of the year, some of the white-throated sparrows in the east and elsewhere are among the most brilliant of all birds. They're really brilliantly marked at this time of the year, but some of them are not. And this bird falls into the latter category. Just one thing with white-throated sparrows to keep in mind is that in addition to being just generally very variable, they come in two categories. So we have what we call the bright or white versions, and then the dull or tan versions. This bird's so dull that I'm actually not sure what to make of it.
I was going to say, it does seem to have a very white median stripe in the middle of the head, which would suggest that maybe it's a muddy white or light bird. But it's kind of tannish on the side as well. I'm not sure exactly what's going on.
Not sure. There's two more, so we'll call them bright and dull or white and tan, occur in a 50-50 proportion across the global population of the white-throated sparrow. And the white birds are dominant to the tan birds, which might make you wonder, why don't they become more numerous than the tan birds? But what's really cool is that there's a so-called balanced polymorphism. The white birds only breed with the tan birds and vice versa, and that keeps the population at a 50-50 basis all throughout the range of the white-throated sparrow. So
yeah, it's so odd. People see the tan birds and the white birds, and they assume that it's male or female, or a young bird and an adult bird, which is typically the case when you see birds that are similar like that, but have slight differences. But no, it's random. Like there are equal numbers. White males, white females, tan males, tan females. They're all kind of equally distributed, as you say.
Yep. I need to correct myself. I think I may have said balanced polymorphism. It's actually it's a dimorphism. It's just those two color more. So a balanced sexual dimorphism, and the whites mate with the tans and vice versa.
The strange lives of our common birds.
Yeah. Actually, while I'm on a roll, I just have to mention one other thing. This is something Nick Miner brought to my attention. But the gene for white versus tan, which sounds so simple, it occupies like 10 to 30% of the entire genome of this sparrow. It's an incredibly, so like multiple chromosomes, and it's just incredibly complicated. So what seems so simple, bright versus dull, is like a huge part of the chromosome. It's a huge part of the genome of this sparrow.
That's strange.
Who'd have thunk? Yeah.
Yeah, at least down here in the southeast, our white-throated sparrows have been petering out for the last 2 or 3 weeks. And actually, it just occurred to me yesterday when I went birding, I did not see any white-throated sparrows for the first time this spring. So my last of season white-throated sparrow passed without acknowledgement from me, just like the last of season dark-eyed junco every year.
That's funny.
Everyone marks your first of season, but no one ever marks the last of season. I suppose I could go find it if I could go get my eBird stuff. But all right, I'll pause for 1 second and say that if any of you have any questions about birds or bird ID, please let us know in the comments. We are streaming this live on in the What's This Bird group on Facebook, on the ABA's Twitter feed, and on YouTube. And it is on YouTube and the ABA's YouTube channel, where you can actually find all of our What's This Bird. So if you want to go back and read or watch all of the What's This Birds that Ted, Greg, and I have been doing for the last just more than a year now. I don't know why you would want to do that, but you could do that. Go to the ABA's YouTube channel, just search for American Birding Association, or probably not just ABA. There's a lot of ABAs, but American Birding Association, and YouTube will get you to it. And of course, if you'd like to keep abreast of when we do these things, you can subscribe to the ABA's YouTube channel too. We'll move on to the next image. We'll stick with sparrows because a lot of people are seeing sparrows this year. This spring, a lot of questions about them. And here's another one that I thought was particularly interesting because the Observer noted he was trying to choose between two very similar, closely related sparrow species, a song sparrow, and what he really wanted this to be was a Lincoln sparrow. Right. And it does sort of look very Lincoln-y, more Lincoln-y. It's on the Lincoln side of the song, I should say, because I do believe this is a song sparrow. For starters, it's a sparrow for the same reasons that the white-throated sparrow was. It's kind of a big-bodied, large-headed bird with a conical, triangle-shaped bill and a long tail. Most sparrows have kind of a long tail. This is sort of a classic sparrow. I think of song sparrows very much the classic emberizid sparrow, not necessarily the old world sparrows. But Ted, when you look at this, you can certainly see why he might have thought it was a Lincoln sparrow, but why is it a song?
Right. So, by the way, it's just a couple more points sort of getting it down to Lincoln's versus song. It's
Sure.
heavily streaked below. So that rules out, for example, white-throated sparrow, which we just saw, or chipping sparrow or field sparrow. So we're sort of down to that Vesper, Savannah, Lincoln's song sparrow realm if we're in Massachusetts in the spring here. One mark in support of a Lincoln sparrow would be the appearance of rather fine streaking below and on the crown. The Lincoln's is a more finely streaked bird, but there's some things that suggest it's not a Lincoln sparrow. So a Lincoln sparrow, especially a really nice, fresh, crisp, clean bird like this one, would have a nice buffy wash across the breast, and especially with the sun hitting it there, you can see that the background color is just a very neutral, cold gray. So that's not going to be good for Lincoln's at all. Lincoln's also on the face, although the mark's a little bit variable, but there's going to be some sort of foxy brown background color. And again, it's just a gray background on this bird. More prominent eye ring on Lincoln sparrow as well, which I'm not getting here. Also, this bird's a little foreshortened here. I think the tail's sort of swinging back around from the camera. Got the bokeh effect going there. I think that's too much of a tail for a Lincoln sparrow as well. So, but it's funny. I mean, you just look at those fine streaks below and no particular appearance of a central stick pin or breast spot, which are good marks for song sparrow. And I can certainly see why you would want to go into the Lincoln sparrow direction. The other thing I'll say about Lincoln's versus song is that, sometimes when I've been in that situation, is it a Lincoln's or is it a song? Lincoln's just like leaps out at me. It's just this really crisp, finely streaked, buffy below. I have to be honest with you. For me in the fall, sort of initial confusion species with me with Lincoln's is a LeConte sparrow. Those really buffy, very fresh fall birds can actually suggest LeConte sparrow to me, a different sparrow in a different genus. But this just looked like a great big, ample, long-tailed brown and gray sparrow with not enough of the buffy tones to make it a Lincoln sparrow.
Yeah, I agree with that. This is a ID tip that was given to me when I became a birder when I was very young, and it was that Lincoln sparrow looks like the streaks are drawn on with a freshly sharpened pencil.
Yeah.
Song sparrow looks like the streaks are kind of drawn on with a crayon, and that typically is best for those Melodia birds, the nominate subspecies that we have breeding across the southern part of the United States. They have the big, thick, buffy, coarse streaking. I do think those birds, the song sparrows that breed up towards the northeast and in Atlantic Canada, do tend to be a little bit darker and finer on the breast than the birds that we get down here, because in the winter, when those birds migrate to the southeast where I do see some birds that look quite a bit different than the ones that we have throughout the year here in the southeast and across much of the southern United States. But as you say, Ted, that tail, the tail stands out to me when you see a bird like this in profile. Song sparrow has a massive tail that it kind of drags around with it. It looks like it's a burden, whereas Lincoln sparrow is kind of very small and much more compact. But yeah, this is definitely a song sparrow, but it's a very Lincoln-y song sparrow, so I can understand why people might think that.
One other exceedingly minor point here, but I'll bring it out anyhow. It's subjective, but song sparrows often come out in the open like this, and Lincoln sparrows are typically sort of holed up in shrubbery, and you see only like a third of the bird or something like that. Now, that said, a Lincoln sparrow could absolutely come out and hop on a wall, and a song sparrow could certainly lurk in the shrubbery. But in general, the Lincoln sparrow is going to be your lurker, and the song sparrow is going to be your pop out in the open and take a look at you bird. Very minor point, but that also
it's something to think about too. And also, you frequently hear them calling, and song sparrow has that big, thick, kind of meaty chirp. Not too terribly different from like a house sparrow even, whereas a link is more kind of drier and shorter. You'll be able to pick that out. A lot of times when I find Lincoln sparrow, it's because I hear that chip, and I don't necessarily recognize it as Lincoln sparrow because I don't see Lincoln sparrow that often, but I do recognize it as different than a song sparrow, which is the first.
Yeah. And, we talked about the comparison earlier between pectoral sandpiper and skylark. Here's another odd one for you at this time of the year. I think that the bird whose call note sounds a lot like the Lincoln sparrows is the black-throated blue warbler. They just have that
dark-eyed junco too.
Although the dark-eyed junco, well, go to Massachusetts, there are lots of dark-eyed juncos. But given that the juncos are gone now in North Carolina, if you had
outside the mountains, they do breed.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Oh, sorry. My bad. Yeah, down where you are. But if you had that sort of, it's odd to think that you got a Lincoln sparrow or of all things a black-throated blue warbler. So
it's funny that black-throated blue warbler likes to stay low in the brambles too. So
there you go. It's a different color, but
right. It's a flag of Estonia. You see a flag of Estonia coming at you. It's a black-throated blue warbler. I do have one question from Facebook that we'll answer before we go on. Lee Stanley notes he had the pleasure of visiting the Cape Coral, Florida burrowing owls. He wonders, how did they end up in Cape Coral? It's probably a story that goes back to the last ice age, I would imagine. They've been there for a long time.
Yeah. So I'm just conjecturing here, and my guess is you or I could Google this and find out the definitive paper on the matter. But that also is my supposition that they're a remnant population. However, birds also have wings, and they use them, and perhaps it was a colonization event instead. Let's back up here a moment for people who don't know. Burrowing owls are all over the western part of North America.
Highly migratory owls too.
Highly migratory owls. And then there's this really isolated population in Peninsular Florida. I think especially around the
Cape Coral, Naples,
south of Tampa. Yeah, right. The Naples. Thank you.
County,
area. And why are they there? It's such a implausible place for them to be. And when you said the last ice age, that implies a remnant, which I guess is sort of the way I'm thinking. But I would not be surprised if somebody at some point has tried to reconstruct the history of that bird and figured out how they got there. Again, whether they've always been there or whether they're colonizers. You mentioned that they are powerful migrants, unlike most owls. And since you said Jared Clark is on the line, they always wind up in Eastern Canada, which is, I should say, they're
burrowing
like
owls. The Western ones.
You correct. The western burrowing owls.
Yeah, those are the ones that vagrate to the east. We had one, and I saw one in North Carolina a few years ago.
But North Carolina is a little closer though to like Oklahoma or somewhere. But like, I'm afraid Jared's gonna call me out on this here because I don't know the exact number, but there are a lot of records from Atlantic Canada and Quebec and Ontario. I mean, not just like 2 or 3. I think like those provinces have Jared, help us out here, but like 8 or 9 or something like that. It's a great bird.
Jared
Don't get me wrong.
He got his Canada bird in New Brunswick.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. So the widespread western population is a powerful migrant.
Yeah, and the Florida birds do not migrate. They're which means they don't tend to vagrate.
That's my understanding.
So far as I know, there may be a few Florida birds in some parts of the southeast, especially, but I think most of the vagrant burrowing owls that have turned up in the eastern U.S. are those western birds.
Yep.
Anyway, that was a bit of a tangent, but
yes,
one more question. L. Bauer on YouTube says he saw they saw a royal tern, and right next to it, maybe a Caspian. Seemed identical except for the bill. Is that diagnostic enough? They are usually bigger, and the bill seems bigger. Yeah, I would say so. Caspian tern, when I see them, usually next to royal terns. I think of royal tern as a big bird. When a Caspian is next to it, that is a massive tern. Like they are gull-sized terns. They're bigger than a lot of gulls. And if you see them next to each other, the size difference will be very obvious.
Where did that question come from?
YouTube.
No, I'm sorry. From what part of the ABA area?
Oh, they don't say.
Oh, I see. Because in California, you definitely need to put elegant tern into the mix.
Elegant tern, right?
As well. Yeah. So the problem there is going to be royal versus elegant. So.
Yeah, I know that where I live in the southeast, we have Caspians and royal terns standing next to each other in the spring and summer on the Outer Banks.
And I think you've had 1 or 2 elegants, haven't you? And maybe even
we have not had elegant yet. It's one of my
somewhere
top
in the
10
East, I think.
less likely.
Got it.
Virginia has. Virginia has elegant
okay.
in Florida. Probably I'm sure we've had them. They're easily overlooked, I'm sure.
Yeah. Oh, they look like royal terns. That's it. That's the problem. Yep.
Yeah. And there's a lot of royal terns, and you have to pick through all the royal terns to find the elegant. And I don't think anyone's wanted to do that yet. All right, we'll move on next to the next photo. Here's a nice, lovely spring bird. This one comes from Arkansas. There are 2 sort of similar blue sparrowy birds that are moving right now across much of the eastern, in particular, United States. The blue grosbeak, which is one of them, is in the west as well. But in Arkansas, you'd be likely to get them both. And people put this photo up and thought, boy, that bill looks big. Maybe this is a blue grosbeak. What say you to that, Ted?
Yeah, so it's funny you mentioned those 2 species. You're showing your eastern bias there. When I think of all bluebirds, I think of like Pinyon jay or mountain bluebird, exactly. And actually, plumage-wise, this is pretty good for a male mountain bluebird, or maybe a very bright pinyon jay. As always, you already mentioned it, but go for the bill. So this is instantly not a pinyon jay or a mountain bluebird. The bill is completely wrong. But we do have those all bluebirds, the blue grosbeak and the indigo bunting, which, despite having different last names, bunting and grosbeak, are quite closely related to each other. So I know what you're saying about the bill, and I can't quite tell what's going on with that bird's bill. It's some combination of open and feeding and yawning, and I don't know quite what all is going on. Right? Oh, it looks like there's corn down there.
It's on a feeder. Yeah.
Below. Yeah. So I had to look down to see that. The reason this is not a blue grosbeak, and I'm going to go subjective on you here, is the hue of blue it's not that kind of midnight purple of a blue grosbeak. And on a male blue grosbeak, the wing would be a more solid kind of bronzy brown with pretty good wing bars on it. Yeah. And I'm seeing sort of a more just sort of plain bluish brown wing on this bird. Incidentally, this bird with a little bit of intrusion there of some brown on the breast, this might be a second year bird. I'm not sure of that, but it's kind of in that gray area. Maybe I should say that brown area. Between,
literally the gray area.
Yeah, between second year and after second year indigo buntings. But yeah, the shade of blue, the intensity of blue, and the kind of plain unmarked wings make this or disqualify blue grosbeak, and definitely disqualify mountain bluebird and pinyon jay. So I'm going to call this an indigo bunting for that reason.
Yeah, and if you zoom in, it looks you can see that the bird, as you would expect, as it's sitting on a feeder, has a big kernel of something in its mouth, and it's making the bill kind of look a little bit bigger and broader than it actually is. It's maneuvering it with its tongue along the lower mandible there. But as you say, Ted, the color of the blue really stands out to me. The indigo bunting, when you get it in good light, really has that turquoisey blue, kind of almost aqua greenish blue color. Whereas blue grosbeak, which is I've seen a bunch of them in the last 2 days here where I am. Saw one this morning when I went out to look for dick thistles, which I did not see. But anyway, the blue grosbeak it is purpley. It's like a purple, deep midnight blue, as you say, like an indigo, almost like an indigo. It's more indigo than the indigo bunting. Actually, right, they should have called the indigo bunting the turquoise bunting. Actually,
or they should have called it the blue bunting. But then we have a problem with another.
Going all the way down. Yeah, the blue bunting is indigo.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, as you say, and another thing is, as you note, male blue grosbeaks have that big reddish brown patch on the wing that usually does stand out pretty well. And obviously we do not see that. So it's a little bit of an optical illusion with this bird, with the bill. It is not as gross. It's not gross enough to be a grosbeak. L. Bauer, we'll go back to those terns. L. Bauer has answered our question before we moved on. They note that they're in Texas, so it did not seem bigger, but the bill was really red. Is that diagnostic enough? I would say when you're talking about Royal versus Caspian, this time of year when the Royal terns are breeding, some of them can have like really almost orangey red bills. Like they can be much darker than you expect. Most of the year they are yellow. One of the interesting thing about Royal tern is that they hold their breeding plumage, that classic dark cap, bright bill, for such a short period. Like it is not very long at all. You start seeing Royal terns start losing the cap as early as like the first week of June. Sometimes they're even entirely white capped by June. And it's just a really brief period that you see that bright color. And if it's not like noticeably different, like a Caspian tern, it looks like you could stuff like 3 Royal terns inside of it. It's that big.
Yeah, the Caspian tern is a honking big bird.
It's a very large bird. Yeah, and if it wasn't that big, if it wasn't like noticeably, wow, that's a lot bigger, then it was probably just a really, really bright Royal tern. And they can get really bright and very red.
Yeah.
Checking comments if we have any additional comments. I don't see anything. All right, so we'll move on to the next bird here. Here's a photo of some shorebirds. I assume they're shorebirds. I can't see their long legs, so you'll have to explain why that's the case, Ted.
Yeah,
photos from Ontario.
You call these shorebirds.
I'm sorry, they're wading birds.
Right, in the United States and Canada, we refer to these as sandpipers. In Britain and Europe, they refer to these as waders. Those are both good names, but here I'm afraid the British and the European name it takes precedence. And this is these birds are clearly wading, and they're not on the sand. So they're shorebirds, as you said. They have very long, straight bills and sort of plain, sort of gray plumage. So that suggests to me that we're in the big sandpiper group within the shorebirds. These are not plovers, which have much shorter bills. They're not avocets or stilts or hasanas for a bunch of reasons. But these birds are very drab. They're just sort of gray and black and white, streaky all over with long bills. They're out in the water, and they have that kind of, rangy, attenuated look. So that gets us into the genus Tringa, of which we have several species in the ABA area. Willets, which are much sort of plainer and thicker build. So these aren't going to be willets. And we have solitary sandpipers, which are smaller build and have really prominent white eye rings. And these aren't solitary sandpipers. So we're in the dreaded greater or lesser yellow legs category. And those birds are really, really tricky. And they're tweeners.
That's why I chose this because I think it takes more than a single. A lot of times I get kind of a sense of whether it's greater or lesser just based on proportion and how the bird appears when it's walking around. But I don't get that much on these birds.
Kind of like with accipiters, so the Coopers and Sharpshin I'm thinking of, I think I may have mentioned this in the past in one of these shows, but, easily 50% of the field encounters, even more than that, like 75% of the field encounters I have with those two birds are like clearly sharp-shinned Coopers. But then there's like the 25% where I'm just scratching my head. And it's the same thing to me with greater and lesser yellow legs. I mean, a huge bird with, a nicely upturned bill and streaking its head off. And, typically in March when we don't even get lesser yellow legs in Colorado, it's so clearly a greater. But then I get these tweeners, and these aren't that easy. That said, let's look at these birds separately. I want to look at the bird up close, so it's the closer left of the two birds. I think that's pretty good for greater yellow legs for two reasons. The bill's, decently long. I never know about foreshortening in these images, but it looks like it's at least as long as the head, and possibly longer if that bill is facing away from us a little bit. It's quite boldly patterned black and white, like greater yellow legs are at this time of the year. Another mark that is less appreciated but quite prominent on this bird is that the wingtips fall a little bit short of the tail tip. So on lesser yellow legs, the wingtips go as far out as the tail tip or extend beyond the tail tip, whereas on greater yellow legs, they fall short of the tail tip or go all the way out. But with this wingtip apparently falling short of the tail tip, that's a nice field mark for greater yellow legs. And that difference, by the way, corresponds to the migration distances. Graders migrate a shorter distance, so their wings are a little bit shorter as a result. So anyhow, this bird on the left has a bill that is upturned, I think, longish, I think. It's got, I think, short wings, and it's a fairly, boldly patterned bird. So those, also, it's pretty deep out in the water for what it's worth. But those all sound like
Jared Clark notes.
Good.
Yeah.
Greater. Now, I want to say something about the other bird, but did I cut you off there, Nader?
For me, the leftmost bird is the more difficult one. If you make a decision on that one, the other one seems much more cut and dried. It already seems more cut and dried. The bill looks much longer on the far right bird. It looks heavier. And as you say, like they're wading way out there. Jared Clark notes he rarely sees lesser yellow legs foraging in more than knee-deep water. And these are out in belly-deep water. But that
what I was going
to
say
seems pretty clearly greater yellow legs just based on the size of that bill. And if that one is a greater yellow legs, I have a hard time not making the front the bird in the front on the left a greater yellow legs as well.
I wanted to say though that the rule that birds of a feather flock together does not apply well to yellow legs on migration. So here in Colorado, especially sort of in late April, but we're still getting it now in early May. You go out to a pond and there could be, let's say 10 yellow legs, 6 of one and 4 of the other. And by golly, they mix it up completely. Those microhabitat differences as noted by Jared, but let's say that the water's uniformly shallow or just muddy. I find that the lesser is as likely to wander in with a greater as in with another lesser. And there may be a little bit of association species to species on migration, but at least in my part of the world, I don't see that that flockiness. So the fact that it's funny, you went for the bird behind, I went for the bird in the front, that doesn't necessarily make the other one the same species. So if you think you've got one correctly identified, in the case of yellow legs, I think you need to look at the other one as well.
Well, my sense is that they appear to be more or less similar in size. Though obviously, the bird on the left is closer to the camera. And, I guess we don't really know how much closer it is to the camera. I assume that they're relatively close because the focus seems relatively, the same on both of them. But it's quite possible that bird could be way up close and the other one could be way in the back. And it's only an optical illusion that makes them look like the same.
And I've been fooled by size on birds in the field, looking at them with my naked eye. So be careful. That a marker that you can't see at all on these birds, but is great if they're running around on mud flats, is the relative length of the legs. So the lesser yellow legs is a proportionally much longer legged bird. And with that with those long wings, it gives it this really weird kind of top heavy look, like it's about to fall over. And then the greater yellow legs is a sort of squatter bird with relatively shorter legs. Now that's a useless field mark in this image right here. But that's a nice mark to look for when the birds are in each other's company. A lesser yellow legs can look kind of tall but it's in the legs, not in the body length.
Right.
So keep that in mind as well.
That's like my daughter. She's 7, and she her legs are growing longer than the rest of her body.
Right,
so she's like, lesser yellow legs. I'll tell
lesser
her.
Yellow legs. There you go.
About.
Okay, cool. But anyhow, so I would call these graders, but
tentatively
they're tricky, and I'd like to watch them come up onto the mud flat, and I'd like to hear them call as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll move on to the next one. I'm throwing a bone to my friends out west. This is a California bird. It's sitting perched on a feeder, so we don't really get a sense of what it's doing, but I think or what family it is from the posture, which is something we might like to see for this bird. But how do we tell it is what it is, Ted?
Yeah,
when it's just sitting on a platform feeder.
Yeah, so this body shape here, and I'm sorry, I can't quite see the bottom of the image. Actually, I can do it if I hang on a second. Making an adjustment here. There we go. Yeah, so this body structure is one of the most distinctive among all families of birds. If you'd never been to the United States, if you'd never even been in the New World, but you knew birds of Asia, you would instantly recognize this as a woodpecker by its pied, but black and white coloring, stripiness and spotting overall, and that chisel-shaped bill, really sort of broad at the base, and then the powerful and pointy toward the tip. Can't quite see the toes there, but I almost want to say that the bird's left foot is zygodactyl. I think I see the 2 front toes coming up there. I may be wrong about that. I can't make out the tail on this bird at all, but this just screams woodpecker to me.
It's shaped like a comma or an apostrophe. It's all chesty, sure. and the legs are way back on its body.
Yep. So, but then we have to decide which kind of woodpecker it is. And Nate, do you know where in California this is from? California's a big old state.
Don't, but I could probably find it.
Well, the reason I'm bringing that point up is because, as with ash-throated flycatcher, great crested flycatchers in New Jersey, where in California it is, usually will tell you which of 2 species it is. So this bird has that black and white barring across the black back, and that makes it one of 2 species, either the ladder-backed woodpecker or the Nuttall's woodpecker, which 99 times out of 100 we identify just by range, because in, say, Texas, you only have the one species, the ladder-backed woodpecker, and in like the San Francisco Bay Area, you only have the other species, the Nuttall's woodpecker. But you can't do that in California because
it's coastal Southern California, but I'm trying to confirm that.
Well, while you confirm that, I actually want to say that this is a really weird bird, and I'm actually not sure what it is. It's got marks of both the Nuttall's and the ladder-backed woodpecker. So that tuft of feathers above the schnoz, the base of the bill there, is brownish, which is a classic Nuttall's field mark. A classic ladder-backed field mark. And then the white striping on the back goes almost up to the nape, which is another good field mark for ladder-backed. But the rest of this looks like a Nuttall's woodpecker to me, with the really sort of sharp black and white underneath, and not sort of the buffy color of a ladder-backed woodpecker. So I'm always wary of too glibly saying that birds are hybrids, but this bird is, by golly, sort of intermediate between the 2. It's got a good mark for Nuttall's. It's got a good mark for ladder-backed. And the back is intermediate, maybe leaning a little more toward ladder-backed. So I don't know what this is. It's a ladder-backed.
Cut and dried Nuttall's, Ted, and then I'm throwing it at you, and you're telling me no. But I have no reason I have very little experience with Nuttall's.
Yeah, well, look at that patch above the base of the
there, but
the,
as you
bill.
said, I don't really think about it because they're it was in Texas when there are no Nuttall's. It's all ladder-backed.
Right. Yeah, but the patch at the base of the upper mandible is a ladder-backed field mark there, and then there's not enough black at the base of the nape for that to be a totally cut and dried Nuttall's either. So the rest of the bird looks like a Nuttall's.
Hybridize? I hate to invoke the H word, but
they do. They also hybridize. That's why I was really curious about where exactly in California this bird is. So anyhow, I would still lean Nuttall's, especially if we're in coastal California, but this is not a great Nuttall's woodpecker either. It's a cool photo, by the way. I don't mean to disparage the photo, but this may be a little more interesting than we had realized.
Yeah. I'm almost there, I think, because I'm starting to see some of the photos I looked. Oh, here we go. It is in Concord, California.
I need some help there. Where's Concord?
Hold on a second.
Okay.
I know where Concord, North Carolina is.
Yep.
It is in Contra Costa County.
Okay, so that puts us
San Francisco.
Right. So that puts us totally in the range of Nuttall's woodpecker and far from any ladder-backed. But so range would tell us that we're deeply within the range of Nuttall's woodpecker. But it's still got 2 marks, the sort of 1.5 marks, the schnoz or the base thereof, and then the amount of white extending almost up to the base of the nape, which is a little more sort of a ladderback part. By the way, I'm good with this being a Nuttall's woodpecker, especially now that I know that it was in Contra Costa County. But it's a.
Do you think that people tend to overlook these sort of subtle intergrade features when they're identifying these birds in places that are more cut and dry? Do you think we're missing something by not?
Yeah. So here's
for ladderback genes and Nuttall's woodpeckers in pure Nuttall's areas.
That's one of my favorite aspects about birding, sort of overlooking the obvious. So I was amazed to learn that there is a population of yellow-shafted flickers in Yosemite National, breeding yellow-shafted flickers deep in the heart of the range of the red-shafted flicker in Yosemite National Park. And, you see a flicker and you think, oh, I'm in California in the summer in the Yosemite National Park. It has to be a red-shafted, but who knew that there are yellow-shafted flickers breeding there? So those sort of... underappreciated phenomena like that. Our discovery here in Colorado just a few years back that there are lots of African collared doves mixed in with the Eurasian collared doves. They are superficially similar, but once you start listening, you realize they sure are very different. So there's so many cool stories like that, and I imagine there are others out there. Again, I just want to be clear now that I know it's Contra Costa County. I'm really leaning in the Nuttall's direction, but when I just saw California and wasn't given anything else, I did see, as I said, 1.5 field marks that are better for ladderback than for Nuttall's.
Lynn Kopka notes that Sibley shows a drawing of downy Nuttall's hybrid, and I'm going to scoot back and grab my Sibley and have a look.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, this is so close to that Nuttall's ladder-backed side of the camp that I'm not seeing much downy invasion here, but could be.
Yeah, give me a second. I'm going to pull Nuttall's. And Chris Ortega notes that the app. No, I don't. Chris Ortega notes that maybe the head posture hides some of the black patch at the top of the back.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, the bird is sort of squinched up around the back, and the part of the bird I'm talking about, I've sort of used some funny terms here, but so the nape is the back of the neck, and because that bird's head is thrown back, I agree that there could be this sort of squinching up of the that last white stripe on the back relative to the beginning of the nape, which is so narrow on this bird, but could easily be sort of squinched up here.
So we got one more image, and we're coming up on a full hour, so maybe we won't take too long of this one. This is one that you were having trouble opening, but I hope you see it now. There's a photo from Ontario, and it's a little dark. I hope everyone can see it. It is a Passerina perching bird with a pot belly and a thin bill. It's all brown all over. It looks like it's got some speckling on the front. It definitely, I think, is pretty firmly in the thrush group. It's particularly the spotted thrushes in the genus Catharus or Catharus or however you want to pronounce it. Mm-hmm. But from there, there's a lot of thrushes moving right now.
So by the way, Nate, I have to say, I wish you guys could see what I'm seeing. It's I think user error on my end, but it's this highly pixelated kind of Christmas lights colored image. I sort of see the bird in there. It's a thrush, as Nate said, on the ground. And one thing that stands out even in this pixelated version is a distinctively ruddy or rufescent tail compared to the rest of the bird. So that alone is pretty much going to tell us it's a hermit thrush. but I'm seeing so little else on this bird that, if you were to tell me this was a Bicknell's thrush, which not really proposing, I actually couldn't really rule that out here. So I apologize. I'm sort of playing with I'm often playing with that, not a full deck. And here I really have a not full deck at all here. I can't see everything on this bird, as I said, just due to a download error on my end, but it looks like a hermit thrush. One other thing I'll say is that in Ontario by May, what is today? What is today? 7th,
May
8th,
7th today.
Yeah. It's still a little bit early we wouldn't have Bicknell's thrush in Ontario, but, I think that, the gray cheeks aren't really showing up yet. I guess Veeries are back. But in Colorado, for example, this would pretty much have to be a hermit thrush just by time of year. But what I'm seeing, or what I can see of this bird, is a warm brown bird with an especially ruddy tail. So that sounds like hermit thrush to me. But if you're going to tell me that I'm missing something critical in the face, which I can't see, I'll
you pretty much got it. When I first was scrolling through this photo, I've got in my head, it shows that, the power of observer expectation, the bias of observer expectation, where I was scrolling through, and in my own head, in my own local patch and where I've been birding, I've been looking for Swainson's and gray-cheeked, because we're about the time when those start coming through. And I immediately began thinking, I've got to identify this with Swainson's, between Swainson's and gray-cheeked. It doesn't look like it has much of an eye ring. So maybe I'm thinking it's a gray-cheeked, but that back looks awfully warm for gray-cheeked, which tends to be colder and darker. And then someone in the comments says, but it's got a red tail. And I kind of slapped my forehead and realized that it's taken in Ontario, and realized that it was pretty obviously a hermit thrush, which have not been where I've been birding for several weeks now. So...
Yeah. Hey, Nate, I was finally able to get the image in a different view here, and now it's a screaming hermit thrush to me. So I'm just seeing much more on the bird. A nice mark for hermit versus gray cheek, which may seem like an odd point of confusion, but they actually can be remarkably similar. They have that sort of cold gray face and breasts. So they don't have the warm colors of like a Swainson's or a Veery. Is the sort of the where the spotting and streaking is, and that kind of dense spotting that I think of as sort of being at the upper breast of the gray cheek thrush isn't very evident on this bird either. So that's another nice mark for hermit thrush. And again, gray cheek out in the open in early May in Ontario is less likely, I think, than a hermit thrush. Hey, one other thing I want to say about a bird like this on the ground, assuming this is a hermit thrush, and I think it is, it's going to raise its tail slowly and then lower it. That's a great field mark for the hermit thrush. No other thrush does that. It's a really distinctive behavior, and I can sort of almost picture this bird just about to do that sort of quick and slow tail jerk
one
there.
One of those useful little field marks that if you don't get a very clear look at the bird, maybe it's behind a bunch of branches, which is not uncommon when you're looking at a Catharus thrush. But you see that tail moving, and you know.
For sure. So anyhow, as I said, I was finally able to get a full screen view on that bird, and I have no problem with this being a hermit thrush.
Very good. All right, so that is all we have, and we are up over. I threw in probably an extra bird. I saw that thrush and I decided to put it in there at the end. But if anyone has any questions, we will take a couple of them before we're all done. But while I'm waiting for you to come up with something, I do want to note that if you enjoy these sorts of free resources, the podcasts that we do, the ABA website, the rare bird alerts, all the cool stuff that goes on at the ABA website, you can help support us by joining. I got it wrong again. Joining the aba.org/join, become a member of the American Birding Association. We have lots of membership at a lot of different levels, from e-memberships where you get all the magazines online, to mail memberships, to you get North American Birds too, and all sorts of stuff. You can check all those membership levels up at aba.org/join. But other than that, I don't see anything. So because we are way over time, I will go ahead and say thank you, Ted. You can listen to Ted and I ramble, quite literally ramble about random birds on next week's American
that's right.
Birding
That's coming up.
Podcast. We recorded it yesterday, so having a lot of Ted time talking about birds the last couple of days. So you can check that out wherever you can find podcasts. You can also find us on What's This Bird, ABA, Rare Bird Alert, all that stuff. And if you become a member, you get Birding Magazine, which Ted edits and frequently has lots of really great information about birds and birding.
Nate, I'll go back real quickly to to being a member. I just want to say, and I'm sort of taking over Nate's body right here, if you're already a member and are completely paid up and have the fullest and highest deluxe membership level, we have just begun our nesting season appeal.
Oh yeah,
we depend so heavily on that fusion of support at the midpoint in the year to really help sort of carry us through the sometimes pretty thin summer and fall months. So really appreciate all of those of you all who already are members in good standing at the ABA, but we can always really benefit from the additional contributions and support. And that nesting season appeal is just getting underway now, so you have plenty of time to contribute to it. Your donations will qualify all the way until the end of June. So we're just getting going with the nesting season appeal, but keep that in mind too, please.
Yes, thank you for that. Thanks to everybody on all of our various social media platforms for following along. If you want to watch this over again, or any of the other What's This Bird programs.
Why would anyone want to do that? No, okay.
Yeah, it's like I don't know why. Look, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but if you'd like to, that's where they are. And I'll say goodbye to you, Ted, and goodbye to everyone else. I hope you have a great day and a great spring. We'll see you in another couple weeks.
Thanks for having me, Nate.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Well, I should probably get on to my next errand here. So, right. So we're good. Cool. Okay. Well, I'll be bugger out and I'll catch up with you real soon. Okay. Thanks. Bye. Bye.